Andrew McCarthy, writer, director, actor. This is your seat, sir.
Trying to make my way through the fog.
Yeah. The smoke is non-poisonous, so we should be okay. We all know Andrew McCarthy because he was part of an important part of pop culture in the 80s. He was one of the people in all these wonderful teenage movies, from Pretty in Pink to St. Elmo. Yeah, Pretty in Pink, yeah, let's hear it for Pretty in Pink! But your debut, your official debut, was in 1983 in a film called Class with Jacqueline Bisset and Rob Lowe. How did you end up in that? Because you were a film student at that point.
I was an acting student in college at New York University. Well, I'd just gotten kicked out of New York University after 2 years, and I was trying to figure out how to tell my parents I'd just been kicked out of college, and there was an ad in the newspaper for an open call, meaning anyone could go audition, and they were looking for someone 18, vulnerable and sensitive, and I thought, that's me. And so I went to this place, and there were 500 other 18 vulnerable, sensitive kids there waiting, and I auditioned probably 7, 8, 9 times, and suddenly I was in the movies.
Okay, and then at a relatively young age, you're on a real movie set. It was a studio production, as far as I remember. How did the first day feel? Was it, I've arrived, or were you dying of nerves?
The first day was actually, I had to wear women's underwear. I wore bra and panties for the first 2 days of filming. So it was, besides it being terrifying, it was just humiliating. And there were scenes with hundreds of extras and me being thrown out into this field just wearing women's underwear, and there were hundreds of people staring at me. So it was quite an entrance into show business. It was terrifying.
Because I can imagine, I've never studied acting, but I can imagine in New York, acting school, they take it pretty seriously.
Oh, they took themselves very seriously, yes.
Okay. Does that prepare you for...
Well, nothing you learn in school prepares you, like in all jobs. Very little you learn in school prepares you for doing the job. And certainly that's true in acting school. And certainly it's true when I was in the theater program, so I didn't know anything about film or cameras. The first day they said, go, walk over and stand on that mark. And I'm like, what's a mark? It's like a little piece of tape over there. Go stand at that. But luckily, Jacqueline Bisset was wonderful to me. Everyone, I was smart enough to know to admit that I knew nothing. Well, I don't think I could have pretended to know anything, but I was 19 years old. I knew nothing, and I just sort of went, "Can you help me?" Everyone, and they did. And they were wonderful to me and gracious to me. I didn't there are two ways when you know nothing. There are two ways to behave. Either as if, yeah, I got this, I got it, yeah, I know. Or, I don't know anything. And I chose wisely that way.
Okay. You're 20 years old, more or less. Are you, okay, you're an actor, you're a professional actor. Do you get starstruck? Okay, I'm gonna play a scene with Jacqueline Bisset, who at the time, let's be very clear about that, was world famous, a beautiful woman. Was this before or after The Deep?
It was right after.
Right after The Deep, worldwide hit. Every young adult had a poster of Jacqueline Bisset in the wet t-shirt coming out of the water in The Deep. I mean, let's face it. Does that affect you somehow, or is it like, okay, this is a colleague, I'm going to do my job?
Well, to get the job, I was the last audition I had. I was flown out to I lived in New York. I was flown out to California, and I had to go to Jacqueline's house to be approved by her.
Oh.
So I was driven up to her house in Benton Canyon in Hollywood Hills, and I brought inside and sat down in her living room and waited for her to make an entrance. And in another room, I heard a toilet flush. And at that instant, I kind of had this thought, oh, she's human too. And so she came out, and at that moment, she instantly put me at ease. I said some wise ass remark, and she just said, oh, you're cheeky. I like him. And that moment, I had no nerves after that with her.
Next up were a couple of films that were actually quite successful here in Belgium as well. One was called Heaven Help Us, which was released here under the title Catholic Boys. And I think that's a film you're quite fond of yourself still,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's the best movie I made in that era. Catholic Boys. And it was written by a guy who survived Catholic school in Brooklyn in 1965, and there was a lot of truth in it.
Yeah.
I still to this day have people come up to me, often big burly guys will just come up to me and stand right in front of me on the street. I'll go, yes, and they'll just look at me and go, Catholic Boys. You know, because there's a certain club of survivors of American Catholic schools.
Well, there might be survivors of Catholic schools in this auditorium as well, because we are, you know, Catholic country with a lot of traditions. I myself was in a Catholic school, so it did look and feel familiar somehow. And then, of course, we have to talk about, I think, the key film of that period, which is St. Elmo's Fire, which is the first film I remember, being of that age, early 20s, that took my generation seriously. I mean, we're familiar with the Porky's and all the teen sex comedies, but suddenly there was a film that took our generation seriously, and that actually was an important film in the pop culture of those days. When you were making that film, did you or the group realize somehow we are making something that will resonate for a long time?
No, of course not. You just sort of, you know, those movies at that time, you hit on what exactly made them resonate then and still have power for a certain generation now, is that they took young people seriously and took our lives seriously. There's no more life and death moment in life than, you know, when you're 17 years old and need to go to the prom with the right person. I mean, that's, we scoff at it as adults and kind of dismiss it, but as a young person, that is life and death stuff. And John Hughes, who's sort of creator of those kind of youth movies of that era, really took young people seriously and honored their struggles and dilemmas, and all those movies were the first to do that, really, as we were talking about before. I mean, before those movies, youth movies weren't the center of pop culture the way that they started to be then and have been ever since. It has not changed since 1985 when those movies came out and suddenly altered the way, it's impossible to realize now, but the way pop culture was before, movies were not for kids. And then suddenly these young movies came out and the movie studios realized, wow, kids go to the movies 5, 6, 7 times, grown-ups go once, let's make movies for kids. And overnight almost, movies began to be made for and about young people in a way they never had been before. And they took us, and we were people in the Brat Pack at that moment, that we were the leading edge of that change that happened. And we were just kids, of course, so you're just thinking, oh, well, this is great, I got a job, fantastic. You're not thinking about some iconically, you know, pop cultural transition moment. You're just trying to remember your lines. But in St. Elmo's Fire, I just remember I was in, several of those people, Demi Moore and Rob Lowe, and some of those people were more successful than I was at that time, so I realized this was sort of my shot, you know, and I'd been in a few movies, but I realized this was by far the most high-profile movie I'd ever been in, and it was and I also knew that I suited that part, and that part suited me really well, so.
Yeah, you just used the term Brat Pack quite casually. At the time, when St. Elmo's Fire came out, it was the title of an article in the New Yorker, was it?
New York Magazine.
New York Magazine, where it was not used in a positive way. It basically kind of put you all together as a group of privileged, entitled brats. And it hurt you. Can you explain, within that time frame, because this was before social media, this was in a time when people actually read magazines and apparently took them quite seriously, how did that hurt you? Or at least affected you?
Well, again, it was this moment, it was this transition moment in pop culture and in the movies where suddenly young people are the center of movies. Movies are all about young people now. Whereas a year before, there were no kids. If you were a kid in the movie, you were somebody's, you know, kid who had a couple scenes. And so there was this seismic shift that happened, and then old Hollywood didn't really like this. They're like, who are these punks that are coming up out of nowhere and taking our jobs? And then there was a magazine article, which is again impossible to realize now with all the different medias and everything, but media was very focused, and with few outlets, it actually got more, things got much more eyeballs. And anyway, there was this article that came out that was very pejorative and very negative and very judgmental about these kids, because he was a young writer looking to make a mark, and he came up with a witty term, which is a great term. And so Hollywood took that and sort of went, yeah, these kids, they're brats. And it altered the trajectory of our careers in a very real way, that we felt, you know, I've said before, I felt like I'd lost control of the narrative of my career overnight. And that seemed to be what happened, you know? And so at the beginning, we all hated this term. We felt it was stigmatizing. And, you know, one of the things, if you live long enough, I've come to realize that, as we were saying earlier, that's one of the greatest blessings of my professional life, is being a member of the Brat Pack. Because had that not existed, I might have been sort of I made some random 80s movies, and now it's this iconic pop cultural touchstone for a certain generation of people, and I'm in the center of that. And so it's been a blessing in a way that I didn't acknowledge or understand at the beginning.
When did you start to realize that? Because you wrote
Tuesday.
You wrote a book about it, Brat, an 80s story, which is actually a great book. You made a documentary in which you go and see Molly Ringwald and well, not Molly Ringwald because she didn't want to participate, but Demi Moore and Rob Lowe and Emilio Estevez. So are you now, is it out of your system, so to speak? Have you now, I mean...
Yeah, I think that's a good term for it. I think when I wrote the book is when I sort of really came to understand it. When I was finishing the draft of the book, I gave it to a friend of mine to read and just sort of ask what he thought of it. And he said, "What's the title going to be?" And I said, I have no idea. He said, "Well, there's only one title for this book, and that's called Brat." And I said, "Screw you, this book will never be called Brat." And I realized in that instant that I hadn't done my work, really. And so I went back and I started to think about what it all meant to me and everything. And so the last third of the book changed entirely from that. And it made me begin to realize exactly what I just said, that this is really the greatest blessing of my professional life, not an albatross. And once that all changed, and again, it was all, and then I made this documentary, but really, I had very little interest in making a movie about the Brat Pack. What I was interested in was our relationship to time as time passes, and how we view and experience the events of our lives differently over time. The same thing that happened, what happened to me when I was 22, I viewed it one way, and 40 years later, 38, 36, a long time later, I viewed 180 degrees opposite. And the only thing that had happened that changed was my internal life.
Yeah.
And so I was fascinated by that. How do we view the event, and how do we make sense and reconcile our lives differently over time, and the events of our lives? Because the events of our lives are just the events of our lives. It's how we interpret them and let them affect us that gives them value, and gives them meaning and power.
Yeah, that goes
So that's what I wanted to make
yeah.
a movie about, really. And the currency I had was to make one about the Brat Pack, because it'd be fun to show clips and cool songs from the 80s. And no one's going to listen to me talk about, you know, the effects of time and life. So, but hiding that message in a documentary about the Brat Pack, they would.
Okay. Well, going back to that period, to the mid-80s, even though the studios might have considered you brats, they also realized there was money to be made. And virtually everybody in St. Elmo's Fire became what then is called a bankable commodity, a star, which means that films were financed if you said yes to them. There were a number of sizable hits, Mannequin, Weekend at Bernie's, Pretty in Pink, that you carried, that your name, Pretty in Pink was a shared effort, but Mannequin and Weekend at Bernie's were, if I may say so, starring vehicles for Andrew McCarthy. You were still very young. What does that do with a person? A star with all the privileges, I guess, that go with it?
Well, I don't know is the short answer, because when it's your life, you're just sort of living it, and you just get up and you go about your business. So, I mean, there was a moment when I realized I couldn't go to the mall anymore, you know, but and I think I was so young and ill-equipped in so many ways that I didn't know how to process it, and I didn't have a lot of vision toward the horizon. I was always had a bit of a freelancer mentality, looking for the next crumb. In a certain way, as opposed to people with a greater vision. It took me until I was much older to sort of have, what do I want to do, and where do I want to go, and what do I do to lay groundwork toward that. I think I ultimately, when I was young, particularly didn't have a great deal of frankly, belief in myself. So I was just happy to get the next job.
So there was never a career plan, so
There's never been a plan, no. I don't know what I'm doing for dinner, certainly. No, but I certainly never had a career plan, you know. Only when I started writing did I have a plan. In the sense of, you know, I knew when I started writing that people would go, oh, the Brat Pack actor thinks he's a writer, oh, great. And so I started writing for magazines and newspapers, and I decided, oh, well, I'm going to be outed as the Brat Pack guy soon, so till that happens, let me write for really good outlets so that by the time I'm outed for being the Brat Pack who thinks he's a writer, I'll have written for the New York Times and National Geographic and Time Magazine, and so they can go, oh, that Brat Pack actor thinks he's a writer. Oh, he's actually written for really good things, huh? You know, and that was a very active, conscious choice, whereas when I was young, I didn't have the wherewithal to think like that.
So that means that there were people at the New York Times and
well, because I started writing for magazines and newspapers, particularly about travel, and everything was done online, and so you didn't meet people. I would cold call people, get their email address, because that's easy enough to do. I would cold call people, and you know, there are a million Andrew McCarthys out there. I would just say, here's a pitch for a story, and here's what I've done.
Are you saying that if you had taken a meeting in person and they would have realized this is the Andrew McCarthy from the Brat Pack, that it would have been more difficult to get your material
Absolutely, I would have been stigmatized, and they would have had a certain preconceived notion or whatever, and would it have helped? Maybe, but probably not. Not in the legitimate places I wanted to be working. So, no, I just stuck to the... And then once I was sort of outed for it, and then kind of had the begrudging respect for having written in good places, then it becomes an asset.
Okay.
In a certain way, they go, oh, we can exploit him, you know? And so that's good. But I wouldn't have gotten those opportunities had I been leading with Brat Packdom.
By the way, writing, why travel writing? There are numerous other areas you could write about. Why travel writing? And was it clear for you from the beginning, if I'm going to write, it's going to be as a travel writer?
Yeah, like anything, it was an accident in my life. I didn't, when I was 15 years old, I walked out on stage in a high school play as the Artful Dodger in the musical Oliver, and it changed my life. I thought, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm going to do. And then when I started traveling the world, I got that same feeling of like, oh, I feel like myself deeply when I do this. And that's all we ever want, any of us, right? We just want to feel like ourselves, the best version of ourselves that we can be. That's all we want. That's all I wanted. And writing did the exact same thing that acting did. And so, and then I started directing too, and people will, wow, that's a weird, you know, a travel actor becomes a travel writer, that's a weird career trajectory. And to me, I go, they're the exact same thing. I just feel like me when I do them.
And so, okay, you found that out with the writing, you found that with the acting. When did you find out that there was yet another aspect of your personality that would thrive as a director?
Well, I think my personality, my temperament wasn't well suited necessarily to be an actor and to be out front. And I began to be more interested in the whole story than just sort of, you know, how my hair looked. And so I directed a short film that I made on my own, and then I was acting on a television show called Lipstick Jungle, and I was having lunch one day with the director, or just having lunch during shoot, and his assistant, with the producer, I'm sorry, and his assistant came running up to him and said, the director of the next episode just dropped out. And he went, oh, and I just was having lunch with him. I said, I'll do it, I could do it. And he looked at me and said, yeah, you probably could. I go, no, I could. I've made a short film. Here, look at it. And so let me direct this episode. And it was happening next week, and he said, yeah, okay. So he let me direct an episode, and I did it, and I had an aptitude for it because I spent my whole life on sets that I knew. And to be a good TV director, a successful TV director in America, what you really need to be is fast. If you have an idea, then you're Orson Welles. But really, you just need to make the sausage and make it on time and make it on budget. And because I'd spent so much time on sets and I hate waiting around and I'm very impatient, I became very facile and very quick TV director. And so I became successful at it very quickly. And then I did a show early on called Orange is the New Black, which that's when it hadn't, Netflix had only ever sent DVDs to people. They didn't, like, the only show they had, I think, was the Kevin Spacey show, the White House show.
House of Cards.
House of Cards, which is terrific. And that wasn't even on the air yet. So when they're making Orange is the New Black, a friend of mine who I'd worked with said, do you want to meet the producer? Anyway, no, they couldn't get anyone to direct it because it was on, like, well, what's Netflix? Well, it's going to be streaming. And like, well, what's streaming? What channel is it going to be on?
So at
nobody
the time,
understood.
it wasn't considered prestigious. So
no, they couldn't get anyone to direct it. And I said, well, I'll do it. I don't have a job. And then suddenly 6 months later, it comes out and, you know, takes the world by storm streaming. And I directed a bunch of them in the first season. So suddenly I was a brilliant director.
Okay.
And so then I couldn't get enough hours in the day to direct.
So in a sense, what St. Elmo's Fire was for you as an actor, Orange is the New Black was your breakthrough as a director.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. We have a couple of minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, there are the 2 mics. So grab your chance, speak now or hold your tongue forever. Sir, we will put, can you try again?
Hello?
Yeah, okay, go.
Hi Andrew. When you signed my Blu-ray, I told you you'd be doing Q&A with the legendary Belgian director, Jan Verheyen. A little bit of background. Jan taught me everything there is to know about movies. I've never met him in person, but through his books and through his TV shows on Canal 2, which I was too young to watch. I was about 9 years old when he recommended Reservoir Dogs to me, so there's that. Just a question, what's a role that you'd really like to play now or in the future, antagonist, protagonist? And then Jan, what kind of film would you like to direct Andrew in as the chosen role?
He wants to know which role you would like to, is there a specific role you would like to play that you haven't done yet? And if I would make a film with you, which role I would offer you? So you go first. Is there, I mean, let's talk about bucket list. What is there, does Andrew McCarthy have a bucket list as far as directing or acting goes?
No, there's no plan, like I say. I did Long Day's Journey into Night, the play, the Eugene O'Neill play when I was a young man, and I've always wanted to play Tyrone when as an old man, although I'm not right for the part, but I played that, so I would love to do that play.
And any specific directing jobs, opportunities? Well, I mean, because now, I mean, in a sense, most TV directors are, and I say this with the utmost respect, are directors for hire.
Absolutely. TV directing is not a very, once you do it for a while, it's not a very satisfying medium, because they'll get somebody else to do it. They'll just slot in someone else. And so I've just written, and it took me a long time to realize that too. You know, directing TV is sort of like, I always said it's like going to the gym as a director. You kind of learn to get in really good shape and work your muscles because you're working in different cinematic styles every week. You've got a lot of cameras and a lot of setups and a lot of pages to do, so you learn to get in really good shape and learn how to shoot. But it's ultimately not that creatively rewarding. So I just adapted, I wrote a young adult novel some years ago, and I just adapted it to make a movie, and we're just financing that now, so I'd like to do that.
Okay, so that kind of answers the question. Now you have developed something that you wrote, and you want to direct as a feature film.
Yeah.
Okay, good luck. And how is it? Is it a studio project or a streaming project?
No, I think it's a streaming project, yeah.
I look forward to seeing that. So that is the next stage then.
Yeah.
Developing your own material to direct.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Because at a certain point you kind of work hard enough to go, well, what am I doing this for? You know, being a gun for hire is not ultimately, it took me a long time to realize that interesting.
But, I mean, we haven't mentioned The Blacklist yet, which is the other television show you did a lot of episodes for. There must be something, I mean, if you do 26 episodes of The Blacklist, there must be something
Well, I like the
Andrew
people,
McCarthy.
you know, it's not, there's not, you know, you get to work with, when you find a group of people you like working with, that's, you know, it's a very journeyman life, being an actor or a television director, certainly. So when you find people that you enjoy working with, it's nice to just go back, you know, go where it's warm, as it were. And I like Jimmy Spader. I mean, Jimmy's a crazy man, but we got on well, and I enjoyed. And on that show was fun because you got to blow up stuff a lot. You know?
Oh yeah, isn't that great, blowing up stuff? We very rarely get to do that with our budgets, so I'm very jealous.
Yeah, but when you
of
have like a big car crash and stuff, it's actually just quite fun to do.
Okay, we have time for one more question there.
Actually, I have a three-part question.
A three-part question. Let's start with part one.
You can answer short. You worked with the legendary director John Frankenheimer for Year of the Gun. That was more or less a disaster, if I'm correct. It was not a success. What do you think about that production? Then, second part of my question. You worked again with a great ensemble cast with Nick Nolte, Chas Palminteri, etc. for Mulholland Falls. That was a small part, but a quite good movie. And then you did the mini-series Kingdom Hospital. For me that was quite interesting and a very good series. So I would like to know your ideas about those productions.
Well, let's go, you started back. Kingdom Hospital was a Stephen King adaptation of a Lars von Trier sort of thing, multi-part thing. And it was interesting because my main memory is that it was a failure, and that it was 13 episodes, I think, back when they used to call them miniseries. We were canceled. I mean, we were still filming, and 6 episodes had aired in the States, and they canceled the show because it wasn't popular. And we had to keep shooting because they guaranteed to sell it, you know, worldwide and things. And so I just remember going to work every day on a show that had already been canceled, and we were all a bit like dead man walking here. So there was that one. What was the second one? The middle one?
Mulholland
Falls. Yeah, Mulholland Falls is interesting because I love Nick Nolte. I was a big fan of Nick Nolte, and so I get to play a couple scenes with Nick Nolte, and I thought that would just be really fun, and it was. There was one time, there was some scene we're doing, and he's interrogating me as a cop, and I'm like some young petty crook or something, and he did one of those Nick Nolte thing, and I remember acting, I was just going, oh my God, he did just like Nick Nolte. You know, it's just one of those moments where, you know, movie stars have like certain things that make them movie stars, and he did one of those Nick Nolte movie star things, and it totally took me out of the scene. I was just like, oh my God, it was such a good Nick Nolte moment. But I really enjoyed working with Nick. I thought he was great. And that movie was almost really good. It wasn't for some reason, I'm not sure why. And the Frankenheimer movie, The Year of the Gun, that was really interesting about the Red Brigades, and I was too young for it, and it was what you were talking about. I mean, I was offered the lead in that because I was simply fairly successful at that moment, and so I was too young for it, and Jean was a stern taskmaster, and we didn't see eye to eye.
Is that, are those, thank you for the questions, the 3-part question. Is that an element for you that helps you make a decision? Who is co-starring and who's directing? What elements of the package do you look at before you say yes?
Well, it depends what phase of life I'm in. I think when I was younger, had I looked at strictly, if my main criteria had been who's directing, if you're going to ask one question, that would be the question to ask. Mostly, I think, as I touched on earlier, I felt so sort of like such a journeyman looking for the next crumb that I just took the job.
Yeah.
I mean, very rarely did I turn down work in life.
Okay. Can you give me an idea? Because we know the films that you did. Was that one film out of 5 offered that you picked? Was it one film out of 10?
Oh, it depended what phase it was, you know? I mean, I did Mannequin simply because it was the first film that I was ever offered. And I was like, oh, I don't have to audition for it, I'll take it. And then I remember reading it and then reading it again right before I went to shoot it. And I was like, what the hell? What am I doing? And I tried to get out of the movie. But I actually have to say that movie has a lovely, gentle, open, you know, innocent heart, that movie. And that's all because the director was a very open-hearted, innocent man. There's not a cynical bone in that movie's body. And it has a lovely, tender feeling about it. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous and could never be made today, but it's a very sweet, tender movie. And you don't see that often.
You never know before, well, sometimes you know, but like in this case, I tend to agree. On paper, it must have looked like ridiculous, and yet it's a sweet film that a lot of people saw and a lot of people loved, and a lot of people loved. So you never know. Is that William Goldman ever said, "Nobody knows anything"? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
The other, now that it's evolved into, you know, so what did you think of the script? Oh, I don't know, I'm the only one who's read it. You know, I think people have less and less trust for their own opinions and things. But, and you never know, as you know, you never know what's going to work. You think something is going to work and you get the good elements and it just doesn't happen. And then other times alchemy happens and it's just like, wow. Okay. You know, we're making Weekend at Bernie's the stupidest movie on the planet, but I mean, that movie just really works. And it's funny to this day.
Nobody knows anything, but what I do know is that Brett is a recommended book. You can see the film, the documentary Brett's. Is it on Apple? I know I saw it, but
it's Disney Plus.
It's Disney Plus. You can see it on Disney Plus, and you can actually see this wonderful, talented, charming person again tomorrow for the signing session, and we will do another talk tomorrow in this auditorium at 1 o'clock. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Andrew McCarthy.